Well, good morning and welcome to the Backcountry Cuisine. We're going to be making my all-time favorite today, cinnamon rolls. There is nothing that is more likely to impress your friends or your partners than making fresh-baked cinnamon rolls in the backcountry. So, we've got lots of ingredients here, lots of things. So let me show you how I have this set up. It's in a big plastic bag, big gallon-sized plastic bag. I have mixed yeast and sugar in here. It's about a half teaspoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of quick rising yeast. So I have that mixed in this particular spot here. And then over here, I have my flour and my salt mixed up. It's about 1.5 cups flour and a half teaspoon of salt. I also put an extra teaspoon of sugar in here just because it'll make the dough a little bit sweeter. If you want it to be a real sweet thing in the morning, then by all means put more sugar in. But I don't want it to be too much. And then in this little cup here, what I've done is I mixed my butter, my brown sugar, and my cinnamon. It's a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 3 tablespoons of butter, and a half teaspoon of cinnamon. And all these ingredients together are going to get me my cinnamon rolls. I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of water. And you might be thinking, well, gosh, 1/2 cup of water, that's not much, but it goes a long way. You end up using a lot of flour for a very small amount of water. And the ideal thing is to have some preheated water, so cold water will make this process go a lot longer, take a lot longer. And so what I did was I just heated up a little, 1/2 cup of water in my stove, and just got it so I could put my finger in it, but it was definitely hot. Like, it didn't hurt my finger at all. You go too hot and you kill the yeast. Too cold and nothing happens. So you want to find a mix there. So I put it all down in the corner, all the yeast down the corner with the sugar, and I'm going to dissolve it. Make sure that sugar's in there pretty good. And then I'm going to close this bag up, a warm spot, which is basically under my shirt, under my sweater, and keep it warm for about 5-10 minutes. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes, and I'm getting a little impatient, so I figure I'll move on to the next step. The longer you let this sit, the more your yeast will populate, and so the more yeast you'll have, and the better your stuff will rise. But it still does a pretty good job with the rapid rise stuff. I've had a pretty good luck with it. All right, so now I'm gonna move some of this stuff out of the way. Take my liquid here and start adding my flour to it. And I put in about half, very roughly. Working hard to not spill things. Very roughly, put in about half. Again, I like to get out most of the air. You don't have to get out all of it, just most of it, so it's not a big balloon, but there's still air in there. And you start mixing it up with your hand. And the big bag makes this a lot easier. One of the reasons why I had that big bag with just a little bit of yeast and sugar in it was that it makes all the mixing so much easier. So start getting that all mixed in there. Some people prefer to put a little bit of the flour in with their yeast to start. The yeast love it. Obviously, they love the sugars in the flour, so that's not a problem. I just don't, but you certainly can. Okay, it's getting there pretty well mixed. I'm going to add more flour now. Maybe half again. I don't want it to be too dry. You could put it all in at one time, but it tends to clump up a little bit too much. So I like putting it in a little bit at a time and trying to get it to mix around well with the other ingredients. At this point, you can see it's forming up pretty good in there. And depending, if you don't mind getting your hands pretty dirty, you can go ahead and open it up now and work it with your hands. But your hands will get pretty dirty. So one option is to have a little extra flour on hand, less than a 1/4 cup, to help to bring up the rest of that flour and and to keep your fingers from sticking to it when you start opening it up and using it. So you don't need to use this extra flour, but it does help to keep your fingers cleaner and get all the extra little bits that are around on the outside. What I'll do, take this and just kind of dust it around on the inside of the bag. And then I'm going to start splitting this open. So I'm actually going to tear the bag open and trying to keep your fingers dusted as you do this, again, just to kind of reduce the mess part of it. And you can start to pull off the plastic, and in this corner, the extra. It's only the edge I really worry about too much, because it's hard to work near the edge when you're kneading your dough. So we're pretty far open now. Go to the other side. So that's a little cleaner. So now we have our dough we can work with, and what my favorite thing to do is to bring out my blue sit pad, and use that as a working surface. So I'll do that now. Now you've got a relatively flat working area, and the inside of the plastic bag, of course, is clean, so we don't have to worry about dirt or too much extra bacteria, things like that. I'm just trying to scrape up some of this extra and get it into my dough. So the dough is sticky, but it's not sticking too much to my hands, and you can see I have most of the flour off the plastic bag now, so we're in pretty good shape. Okay. So now, again, I take a little bit of that extra flour. You don't have to do this, but it does make it work easier for you. And you just dust it lightly on this side. And then do the same thing on the other side. So a light dusting of flour. And you can fold it in half and squeeze it out into a nice flat space. Some people will use their water bottle and roll it like this. That's fine. I've always found it in some ways it's kind of easier to just use your fingers and squish it out. I try to make it roughly into a square or a rectangle. Okay, so next thing is we take our brown sugar and butter mixture and cinnamon mixture, and we spread it out all over. If I was smarter, I would have kept this inside my shirt as well. It helps to keep it warm and spread easier. Got kind of cold this morning. Okay. Now, a lot of people put walnuts in here too. The traditional way is to spread the butter and then sprinkle the cinnamon and the brown sugar on top. I just mix it up because it's one less thing to do, two less things to do. So now you just roll it up like this. And this is why flouring the plastic bag is nice. It will still peel up if you didn't, but it certainly peels up easier if you do. You can also use parchment paper. That works really well. But I just like the fact I've already gotten this bag dirty, and I'm bringing all the ingredients in it, so one less thing. So now you've got this big roll, and that's where your cinnamon rolls are going to be. So now, I'll bring out my pan. And what I do like to put in here is a piece of parchment paper. Otherwise, things really stick pretty badly. So I take a piece of parchment paper, and you could cut it out so it's really perfectly matches the circle, but I just put it in so that it comes up the edges a little bit like that, and it's fine. Now, if I was If I had more stuff, I'd have a better utensil than this, but I'm always using ultralight stuff. So I just bring this little fork spoon combination. And I want my cinnamon rolls to be about the same size as my pan. Approximately. I go a little bit lower. And that seems to work pretty well in terms of sizing them to go inside. And again, if you had a sharp knife, this would do a much, much better job. But I do not. And yet, it still works. And the cinnamon rolls taste just the same. So, I don't particularly care if they're a little rough, because once they start baking and expanding, then they do a lot better. What I usually do is I put the bigger ones around the outside. And then, if it works out, I put the end pieces in a little closer to the center, because the center cooks a little bit slower than everything else. Alright, if you weren't impatient, you could let this sit for another couple hours, or like another half hour, and keep it warm, put it in a warm spot. But I'm impatient, and a backcountry oven is a pretty low heat oven anyways, so I find that it rises pretty well without even having it rest at all. So I'm going to be careful to clean up all this mess before I dump it, but for the video, I'm going to get this thing going in the oven right now. Put my reflector down. This is my Esbit stove. I really like using Esbit for baking. It's for dry baking, it's exceptional. Works really, really well. And what I've also found is that a drop or two of alcohol on top of the Esbit makes it light so much easier. The Esbit does not like to light. You just put that little bit of alcohol in there though, and it lights right up. Just goes super easy. Otherwise you have to like sit there and hold your lighter to it forever. I really like that. I'll put this on. This is the Flat Cat gear setup. Again, I really like that. It's been working really well for me. I'm just dry baking today, so I'm going to put this pot this pan, Fat Daddy-O, right in the bottom of my Evernew pot, titanium Evernew pot. Put my lid on, my ultralight lid. And then I have this carbon felt insulating top, and this I have found makes a huge difference. So this is, carbon felt's really cool because it has a property to it so that it never burns. It doesn't burn up. Must have had something on the bottom of my pot because something is burning. But anyways, it helps to insulate and keep that heat inside the pot so I don't lose it outside the lid. And it works great. So I'm just going to let that go. And that runs for about 45 minutes. And when the Esbit tablet is totally done and burned out, then I find that the food is really well baked and everything comes out great. So we'll come back in about 45 minutes. Alright, so let's check this out. Unfortunately, somebody in the campground's got a leaf blower going, so that's no fun. But anyways, so here we've got our fresh baked cinnamon rolls. You can see they're all nice, super nice in there. Let's see how this middle one turned out. Whew, that's hot. So because I didn't let them rise as long, they aren't as big as they would be as if you let it go for a little longer. But totally cooked. Oh yeah, that tastes so good. Fresh baked cinnamon rolls in the backcountry with your little Esbit stove tablet dry bake. Take care all, and eat well.